Hey, how's it going? This is update number 12, I think. It's been a little while, but been kind of busy, and yeah, 4 kids, lots of stuff going on. But it's things are going really well, I think. And of course, we're working at AMD. We're getting ready for GDC coming up in a couple of weeks, so there's a lot going on there, and a lot of really neat projects flying around. And yeah, I just finished putting a new engine in my G35, which had been sitting for 2.5 years at my dad's place, and he got tired of it sitting in the corner of the shop. So, but it's nice to have a second car with a back seat again. So maybe I'll do another video or something on that later on. But getting back to the CNC machine, one of the if you've watched the previous videos, you might be able to tell that a few things have changed here. So, and I swept, but then I cut stuff, and this was clean. I promise. Well, nobody cares but me, but it's going to bug me. So anyway, pretty much everything has changed. I'm still using most of the same mechanical components, and we still got the torsion box there. Electronics haven't really changed. I don't have the wiring harness hooked up at the moment, but so I guess we can start from the bottom up. On the x-axis, which is why I call it the long axis here, I've added these plates, which are half-inch aluminum. That stuff is not cheap. Half-inch aluminum, and then just a couple of links of threaded rod that run to the other side, to a matching plate on the other side of the gantry. And these just we just tighten these up to sort of put some tension on the between the sides of the gantry, and that just makes it a lot more rigid. Funny little thing, if you ever need to make a bolt out of threaded rod, you just take two nuts, put them on here, and twist them opposite ways so they tighten against each other. They stretch the threads on the inside, and it just keeps a tremendous amount of tension on it. So it's pretty much as good as an actual bolt, but this way you can make one that's 3.5 feet long. So moving on, for this part, this is made of on the previous version of the gantry, I had two pieces at right angles, and the bottom one would sit here on the rails and hold these two bearings here. And then we had one that was just straight vertical. And so I've taken both of those pieces and just bolted them together. The aluminum, and again, is kind of expensive, so doing it this way just let me reuse this material. Side effect that is, you can see how many different holes there are in there that are not actually used for anything, just from previous versions or uses of that machine. Try doing that with wood sometime. It doesn't really work out. So you'll notice, hopefully, that is at an angle. So the reason is, if you look at the z-axis here, if we had the spindle mounted at the moment, then it would sit about like this, right? And that puts the cutting head right in the middle of this plate on the bottom. And that's nice because the travel is limited by this piece that goes under the table, which in this case is really just, for the moment, these two long lengths of threaded rod that we've got. So we get a couple of benefits of that. One is that the cutter is really the heavy part, and this is the center of gravity is directly over where the bearings ride on the rail. So that's good. And it also means that we actually wound up with about a foot more travel on this axis just by rotating those that way. So whenever you're looking at other videos or other designs out there and you see that they're rotated like that, well, that's kind of why. It turns out it's actually a pretty good idea. Another thing we did was go ahead and cut these rods because they were sticking out about a good 18 inches past the edge of this. My shop is not huge. It's 12 feet by 16 feet. This thing is 3 feet by 4 feet. Well, that's actually a little conservative. It's slightly larger than that. And I just keep running into it all the time, so I just went ahead and cut them off with a Dremel tool. I left a little extra length on the other side, so if I need to make some adjustments here, then that's no problem. Moving on. Whenever I went to this design, I went ahead and took the motors, and for the y-axis here, I moved this from the outside of the frame where it was directly coupled to the lead screw to the inside of the frame, and we have a timing belt and some pulleys here that it's just driven that way. So if I had a handle on this thing, that could rotate it, and you would see the belt turn, and then of course this screw turn as well. Those were pretty cheap. I think I got 10 belts and 5 pulleys for about 15 bucks or something off Amazon. It was pretty nice. I try to use Amazon instead of eBay just because things show up in a reasonable amount of time, and if it shows up and I decide I don't really need this or it's a piece of crap, it's super easy to return. Typically they refund the money as soon as I drop it off at FedEx, so it's kind of neat. For the Z-axis, got rid of the old plywood contraption and redid this out of 1/2-inch aluminum plate again. And this is pretty involved. There are 16 countersunk holes back here with M6 bolts. One of them is off because just doing the stuff by hand is kind of an error-prone process. But we've got the bearing here that the lead screw rides in, another one on top, and we've got another one of these belt arrangements. For this top piece, you'll see that I've done a kind of sloppy job of slotting these holes that the screws go into that hold the stepper motor. Doing this without a mill is really, really challenging. And you can't drill overlapping holes like you can in wood to make a slot, because your drill bit just wanders all over the place. And, occasionally just snaps in half, flies across the room, and breaks well, actually it didn't break, it just cracked an old monitor that I had sitting here. Fortunately, it wasn't one of my work machines, it was just, that one that's sitting up there now. So, we've got these pulleys, the belt, and the reason this is slotted, and you'll see that each of the screw holes is slotted, as well as where the shaft comes through here. And that's so that the motor can move this way, so you can correctly tension this belt. There are a lot of ways to do that. That one seemed pretty easy. For this one down here, I really wish I had moved that before I started this. This thing is just a plate out of 1/4-inch aluminum. I drilled a hole with a hole saw so it would fit around this rail. And then on the other side, we've got I tapped this for a couple of M5 screws. I'm just using a set screws. So the practical upshot is this motor can rotate this way. It rotates obviously around the rail that it's attached to, and that lets me tension the belt fairly easily. And I just tighten up the set screws on the other side to keep it in place. And it's rigid enough that I can actually when they're tight enough, lift the machine up holding that. But obviously you don't want to do that. And it's a 6mm timing belt. It doesn't need to be super tight. It just needs to be, stable. So that's our X, and actually that's our Y-axis and Z-axis. Y-axis, we still got the lead screw here, back of this incredibly complicated aluminum thing. For this side, I've got these anti-backlash nuts. It's a little black thing here. It's probably kind of hard to see. That I got from openbuilds.com. I love those guys. They make really neat stuff. And that thing is tapped and just into a little piece of 1/4-inch plate. I also tapped the side of my back plate here. Yeah, that's not tight right now, so it's not exactly straight. And that's how the lead nut attaches to the Z-axis. So that works really well, actually. And just a couple other things. One of the problems I had on the previous version was it was really difficult to take apart if I needed to change something. So for this one, these rails that the Z bearings ride on are not actually attached to this thing at the bottom. These holes aren't drilled all the way through. They're just blind holes. The rods just sitting there. They're held in place, attached to the top plate with these little retainers. I don't know what you call these things, that I've had for a while. So to get this apart, I just have to loosen the motor, take the belt off, take these 3 M6 nuts here and 6 bolts out, and then the whole thing just comes out, just lifts right out. And that is actually saved my bacon a couple of times today, just because I've been working on the part and trying to get everything lined up. And that's where it's at. The other thing is I was going to use this lead screw across the bottom of the table to drive the long axis, but it's not quite long enough for what I want. It's 1,000mm. It's the longest one I could find. Yeah, no jokes, please. And I had a neat little arrangement where I had a block that had some holes drilled for these rods to go through, but these things still, when they're correctly tensioned, still flex like quite a bit. So then I thought about, well, I could get another chunk of aluminum and I could make a piece, but that's going to be like $50. And I just, yeah, and I'm still be stuck with some racking. So instead, what I've got is, this is just some standard, number 25, ANSI number 25. It's a US thing, obviously. Well, it was obvious, I don't know why I said it, but this is basically bicycle chain. And so I've got about 10 feet of that. And from buildyourcnc.com, and they're a little outfit that's actually based in Katy, Texas. So I'm in Dallas, so it's about 200 miles away from here. I got these really neat little idler sprockets. I've just put a bolt through here to make working with it a little easier, and it just fits right on there. Because hey, it's gear, no big deal. So I've got 4 of these. And then I've got 2. These are just drive screws, or drive sprockets. They bolt directly to the shaft on the motors. So I think what I'm going to wind up doing is taking my last motor here, mounting it this direction, running a shaft from it to each side, put those drive sprockets on there, and then run the chain. Anchor the chain on each end, and of course we'll have the drive sprocket and the idlers, so just to keep it tensioned. I haven't figured out exactly where I'm going to put the motor. It's getting a little crowded on this side, but it makes more sense for it to be anchored to the gantry than the table. If I put the motor on the table, then the chain has to be circulating, which means I need roughly twice as much chain as I would if it's mounted up here. So what I may wind up doing is just making another one of these mounts. It's very simple. It's just a hole for the screw holes and then 2 for the set screws, and tapping a couple of things. Putting it over here, and then just running a shaft across to the other side, but out here putting the drive sprocket and the idlers, and just have the chain come, if I can get this, so you can see my pointless hand motions, and then just have the chain come in here, and then up around the drive, up around the motor, around the idler, and then down to the other end where we can put a turnbuckle or something to tighten it up. And I think that's going to work out pretty well. The nice thing about this arrangement here, I can't actually move this carriage right now because the lead block is, the backlash block is actually bolted down, so this thing won't move. But the way that this motor is rotated, it just slides right behind this carriage. This whole thing, there's plenty of room back here when this thing moves in. So the this guy can actually come all the way over here to the it actually hits this nut. It doesn't even hit that pulley there, this bolt coming out. And same thing on the other side. So when it's full all the way over, the cutting tool is about an inch away from the edge of the table on this side. And I could stretch this out a little bit to get it to go all the way, but this is already overkill. I think it's fine. And one guy I worked with liked to ask the question all the time. It's like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And right now, there is no problem that I'm trying to solve. So, yeah, I'm just going to leave it like that. And I just think that thing looks really cool. Word of advice, I built this myself, this part, because I wanted to, and I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot doing it. But this is probably about $35, $40 worth of aluminum, probably another 20 for the bearings and the rails, and throw in another 10 or so for the pulleys and the belt and stuff. And I probably spent about 20 hours making this thing, remaking it, figuring it all out, and finally discovering these things called transfer screws, which really help with lining up mounting positions for parts that you need. And you can buy one of these for $200 for a nice one off of eBay. So if you're just interested in getting the machine running as quickly as possible, just go buy one, really. Save yourself a lot of trouble. But I like mine, and I made it, and that's just kind of the way I do things around here. So you know, could have bought a table, but I built one instead. And I love it. It's awesome. Yeah, so not much else going on. I built a shelf over there to help clean up the mess. It'll hold some stuff. That's about the only thing I've ever actually used my pocket hole screw jig for. And I have a jigsaw. Not a jigsaw, that's a bandsaw. Wherever the hell it is, I don't know. It's cheap. Something for Boy Scouts. All right, well, thanks a lot. Take care, and yeah, see ya.